Hi, I'm Effie and this is What Effie Reads. Today I'm going to be bringing you a spoiler-free review of House of Sky and Breath, the new Sarah J Maas novel, as well as a spoiler-filled blog.
I was lost, but you helped me find my way, tainted by a desire, 'cause I was scared to face the truth. You pulled me out from my anxiety.
A few things to note. I didn't end up getting my physical copy before I finished this book, so it's all Kindle. And the other thing is, this book is adult, possibly new adult, so this video will contain adult themes and adult language, so be aware that I will be discussing spice and I think there's some swearing as well. So straight off the bat, House of Sky and Breath opens with a prologue that follows characters that you've not met before in this universe. It is just the one chapter, but it took me by surprise because so much tension was built up in House of Earth and Blood that I expected to jump straight into Bryce and Hunt's story, so I was somewhat surprised that we didn't do just that. But then there's definitely been precedent set in other Sarah J Maas books for this to happen, and it was just the prologue that followed someone different. In that prologue you were introduced to characters known as Thunderbirds, which sat a little bit strangely with me as the only Thunderbirds I've come across are those of various nations indigenous to North America. I mentioned in my spoiler-filled vlog, but I will be looking out for Own Voices reviews from those kinds of booktubers, book talkers, etc. to see how they feel about it, but it just struck me as a little bit of a strange inclusion. The next thing I will note is, whilst it was in the blurb, it did take me by surprise the fact that Hunt and Bryce decided to have a kind of no sex pact, because things got really quite hot and heavy. The tension felt like it built up a lot in House of Earth and Blood, so I was kind of looking for them to be getting together in this book, and I felt like it happened really a lot slower than I would have liked. Now don't get me wrong, this book does have spice. Like chapter 3 we have spice, and I did appreciate that this book uses a lot less of the euphemisms and refers to people's actual body parts rather than things like velvet wrapped steel. There is the odd velvety dropped in there. There is talk of cores and mounds, but it feels a lot more anatomical and like real people talk about that kind of thing. Overall, I think one of my biggest problems was that House of Earth and Blood packed such a punch and it had such a big finale that this book couldn't live up to that. So I went through this book expecting there to be this big showdown, and I just didn't feel like we got that. I think overall the issue is that this is, as far as I'm aware, a middle book in a trilogy, although where we leave off at the end of the book, I'm not sure what's going to happen next with the series in terms of how it's going to all shake out. Sorry I can't be a bit more detailed about that, but from what I understand, this is Crescent City is intended to be a trilogy, and this very much read like a middle book where you already know the characters and you're kind of setting up the major conflict that they overcome in the final book. But I just found the pacing to be really slow. There were a good number of surprises throughout. I thought the characters were relatively complex, or at least their motivations didn't seem immediately obvious, whether they were for good or ill. I think it felt a little bit more predictable than House of Earth and Blood. I felt like House of Earth and Blood had some really good foreshadowing and clever clues, but it was the kind of thing that you pick up more on reread, whereas with House of Sky and Breath, I felt like the clues were a lot more obvious, so when reveals happened, I was somewhat expecting them to shake out that way. There's definitely some answers that we got in this book that I didn't know we needed or didn't know we wanted, and there's also some questions that are still left somewhat unanswered, and we'll find out in whatever book we get next. Possibly my biggest issue with this book is that it read a little bit more like science fiction towards the end rather than fantasy. I don't have an issue with science fiction as a whole, but it wasn't what I was expecting from this book. So it didn't really scratch the itch I was looking for it to scratch. In terms of my favourite bit of it, it has to be the final page of the final chapter. I'm not talking about the epilogue. The epilogue was a little disappointing. I felt like it didn't bring as much as the epilogue in House of Earth and Blood did, in terms of I felt like the epilogue brought something more to the story, whereas the epilogue in House of Sky and Breath felt like an extra 6 pages tagged on the end and didn't really add much. So I was left a little bit disappointed, but the final page of the final chapter left me absolutely shocked, and I really need to know what happens next. And I think we're looking at least a year, probably more like 2 years before we get the answers that we want. Another thing that I did appreciate in this book is the diversity felt a lot more explicit. It felt a lot less hedging. There was still a little bit of characters described as having tan skin or golden skin, but there were also characters whose skin was described as being shades of brown or as dark as onyx, which felt a lot less racially ambiguous, and I really appreciated that. I also felt like the queer characters were very, very obviously queer. There wasn't really a space for you to be like, oh well, maybe they're queer, maybe they're not. I think if you've read other books by Maas, you'll know what I mean in terms of, like, yes, she does include queer characters, but they're a little bit wishy-washy, and you could maybe say, oh, I don't know. For example, in House of Earth and Blood, you have Fury and Juniper, who are a couple, but it almost felt a little bit like reading between the lines. Like, they were obviously a couple to me, but I could see someone reading it and maybe seeing them as not queer. I don't know. But the queer characters felt a lot more obviously queer, and as I say, there was a number of less racially ambiguous characters, which I did appreciate. Overall though, I think this is a book that had a lot to live up to. House of Earth and Blood was such a good start to the series, and it packed such a wallop that I think it was always going to be really hard to follow it up. So unfortunately this book did leave me a little bit disappointed. But I'm definitely interested in seeing what happens next, and I definitely feel like you can see a growth in Maas's writing, which I definitely appreciated. So I'd love to know what you thought about this book. Feel free to continue to watch my spoiler-filled vlog for more detail about some of the things I've mentioned. Or feel free to just comment down below your thoughts on this book, or if you're going to pick it up. Have I swayed you one way or another with this? Let me know. So I'm just editing this video, and I realised that I forgot to mention that in this vlog I'm not going to be pulling any punches. I'm going to give like complete unfiltered, possibly a little bit critical thoughts and feelings, but obviously if I'm loving something, I also won't hold back there. If you're looking for someone who's probably going to give you all the fangirling over this, check out Shannon at Head in the Books. Her vlog will be going up soon, and as soon as it is, I will link it in my description down below. So without further ado, let's get into it. So it's about 11:15 now, which means that in a little over an hour, House of Sky and Breath comes out. Yay! So my plan is to try and read it in a day. It feels kind of ambitious, but at the same time I have to keep reminding myself that last year when A Court of Silver Flames came out, I read that in a 24-hour period. Now what it does mean is that I will literally do nothing else for 24 hours. Like, I remember sitting on my sofa and only getting up to go to the toilet. I don't think I cooked on that day. Nothing. I literally just read for the whole 24 hours. But I'm playing it a bit smarter this year. So, one, I've had a nap, so I'm going to be like at the stroke of midnight, or near enough, I'm going to be starting it. So I've bought it on my Kindle. I've pre-ordered the audiobook, and I've also ordered a physical book. Now I know that sounds a bit excessive, but I get a £10 Amazon voucher each month, so that's gone towards the Kindle edition. And then obviously Audible was just a credit, and I don't really spend my credits on Audible very often, so I had a few sitting around and figured might as well use it. But hopefully that'll mean that I can do a few things like actually cooking and maybe do some housework or whatever, but still be able to continue to read it. So that is the plan. For now, I am going to spend the next hour or so getting my space as comfy as possible. I'm also going to put some makeup on so that I just feel a bit better, since I'm basically going to be filming all day. And I'm also preparing a Valentine's meal, because obviously today is the 14th. And just waiting for B to get back from work. It's 1 now, and I can finally read House of Sky and Breath. Like, clearly it took me a lot longer to eat than I was expecting, but the time is now, and I am so excited to get into it.
least 15 late. That's just a couple things I've learned about boys these days.
I'm about 3% into the book now, and I've just finished the prologue, and I've got some theories, thoughts, I don't know. Oh, my glasses are steamy. So the first thing is, I did not expect this book to introduce new characters, especially straight off the bat. I'm guessing that what we're getting is a little bit like we got in the Actor series, where you've got a prologue of something that relates to the main story, but it doesn't circle back round until later on in that story. So we've met Sophie, who is a Thunderbird. I have thoughts about that. And she's saving her brother Emil. And you sort of learn a bit more about the rebels, which I think is really interesting. But I guess we'll see if these characters do end up being important. I'm interested to figure out who Silver is, because the fact that you only know Silver as Silver makes me think that they're possibly someone that we already know. I'm not quite sure who that's going to be, but I guess we'll find out as the book progresses. Duh. But yeah, the concept of the Thunderbirds is, I don't know, it's sitting a little bit uncomfortably with me. I only know Thunderbirds in the context of some Indigenous nations in North America, but I don't really know much about them. So before I progress with the book, I'm going to do a little bit of research and I'm going to continue reading. But so far, I'm very hooked. It's just that little thing that's making me feel a little uncomfy, and I was a little surprised that we didn't jump straight back into Hunt and Bryce's story. I'm just checking back in because I've done a bit of research, and from what I can tell, Thunderbirds are something that solely exists as part of various Indigenous nations in North America. I can't seem to find any other mythoses that contain the idea of the Thunderbird. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what this book does with the idea of the Thunderbird. As this vlog's going to go up fairly early, I'm probably not going to be able to find any Own Voices reviews from BIPOC creators who have spoken on this. However, I will keep my eye out for them, and I will pop links in the pinned comments for what any have said, because obviously I can't really accurately comment on the use of the Thunderbird. I will just say that it feels a little uncomfy. And I think I forgot to say just then that I wonder if this relates to Hunt, because they've said no one has Hunt's powers. It does seem like what he can do is a little bit different from the powers that Sophie and Emil demonstrate in the prologue, but it would be interesting to see how that actually plays out and if they are related or that kind of thing. At the end of House and Earth and Blood, it was discussed the fact that Jasper and Adis do know who Hunt's father is, and I'm expecting that's probably going to come out in this book, but I guess we'll see.
No
chapter 1 where Bryce is at the ballet to see Juniper doing her thing is basically exactly how I expected this book to start. Like it's cute, you're kind of touching base on what happened after the events of House of Earth and Blood, and it's just a lot of fun. But I burst out laughing when Ember asked if Fury hadn't wanted to sit with them, and Bryce said that Fury wanted to see every drop of Juniper's sweat, and Hun made a comment along the lines of, well, you'd think she saw that every night. And I just thought, brilliant. Like, yes, we need more overt queerness in these books, because that is one of the things that I feel like Maas lacks. Like, yeah, she has queer characters, but it always feels like they're kind of at the back. And I don't have particularly high expectations for queerness in these books, but I would like just a tiny bit more queerness. And this, like, making it a little bit more explicit, like, it was fairly explicit in House of Earth and Blood, but I also felt like you could, like, claim ignorance. I can't think of the term now. But yeah, I'm very happy with how, like, explicitly queer and those two are a couple it is in this book. Sarah J Maas has really gone, this is an adult book for adults. Like, I'm on chapter 2 and there's literally a line that goes, Angel's wings were highly sensitive. She might as well have grabbed him by the balls. Fair enough. It definitely feels like Maas isn't playing with this book. I'm on chapter 3 and it opens with sexy times. And I'm also appreciating that we're getting proper words. Like, we've got cock and we've got clit. So I'm very, very happy about that. I'm a little bit further in now, and maybe 10%-ish. Tharion's just trying to find Sophie's body, and I just have some thoughts. Nothing particularly, like, exciting, but he's talking about how the River Queen, like, keeps him on kind of a tight leash and doesn't want her daughter being upset by him. And then he's talking about how, like, he took her maidenhead, and I'm like, this book has literally got, like, clit, cock, like, face sitting in chapter 3, and yet you're calling it a maidenhead. I mean, even discussing it in those terms, like, this is a really, like, it feels like a really contemporary setting. Like, yeah, it's fantasy, but it feels like it's set now. And yet you're talking about maidenheads, and even the concept of, like, that having value, considering it's a social construct. Oh, I don't know. Just slightly boils my blood. But I think it's also, like, the old-fashioned terminology for it as well that's bothering me. But it's, like, a little annoyance. I've said I'm not gonna, like, pull punches when talking about this book. If things aren't sitting well with me, I'm gonna say. I will say, though, that it does feel like the queer characters are a lot more explicitly queer. Like, this isn't the first time Maas has had queer characters. There's queer characters in Throne of Glass, although she does use the cheating bisexual trope, which I did not like. And there's queer characters in ACOTAR, but the queerness feels a lot more explicit, and I don't mean in, like, a sexually explicit way, although, like, there's plenty of book to go, so maybe it is. But it's a lot more like they're openly, like, calling each other girlfriend. Like, there's no grey area. They're very explicitly like together. And I also feel like the physical characteristics feel a lot more vague. Like, one of the things that Maas does a lot is talk about people that have a tan, leaving them like deliberately racially ambiguous. And I still think there's probably more room to be a bit more explicit with race, but she's now talking about people having light brown skin, dark brown skin, which feels a lot more explicit. Like Caucasian people tan, so saying someone is tan is telling you nothing. Like it feels like deliberately like being ambiguous, so you can say you've got a diverse cast without actually necessarily having a diverse cast. But we'll see how it progresses. So, good and bad. I am enjoying Bryce and Hunt's story. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how I say arranged marriage, but I suspect the marriage won't actually go ahead. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how that storyline plays out. Is a little bit of cognitive dissonance, how you've got a very modern society, but then you've got things like the Autumn King sees Bryce as property and is able to decide who she marries. And then obviously Tharian talking about maidenheads. But I'm going to get back into it and see how the rest of the story progresses. I think I'm only about 4 or 5 chapters in, so still quite a chunk to go, obviously.
Oh, I've been a liar. Pointed a finger when I started the fire, and I've never been one to pray.
So Hunt and Pollux have just got into a fist fight, and Bryce has come down to kind of be like, Hunt, what are you doing? And Pollux tries to shame Bryce by saying that she's a prostitute, and I love it. Bryce just snaps back and goes, sex work is a respectable profession in Crescent City. And it's the little things that I'm enjoying about this book. I've gone into this book like fully expecting to be critical of it, but so far I'm really enjoying it, actually. I think it is the little things like, iterating that sex work is work, and the fact that it's using like common words for genitals rather than things like the classic velvet wrapped steel is really actually quite exciting to me, and it feels like it's showing some growth in the writing. Now I do know that like the ACOTAR series and I think Throne of Glass were published as YA. I know that the first few books of ACOTAR were definitely published as YA. I don't know if Throne of Glass, all of them are YA, or if they crossed over into new adult a bit later on. But even kind of ignoring the differing age categorizations, it does feel like there's growth in this work, which I think makes sense because this is her 16th book, I think. 8 Throne of Glass, 5 ACOTAR, Soul Stealer, so that takes you up to 14. House of Earth and Blood's 15. Yeah, so this is her 16th published novel. So I guess it's not really a surprise that there's growth, but it's so nice to see this definite growth. Overall, I've got no idea where the story's going. Considering I'm about 15% in, I kind of expected a little bit more, but also I do know that House of Earth and Blood was quite slow to start, and then like the final 200 pages maybe was where everything really happened and you had all of your reveals. So it is possible that it won't be until I get to about the 75% mark that things really kick off. I do think that there's a lot of little things being established. Like, I'm very interested to see if Celestina is as nice as she seems. Like, there's a lot of suspicion, but then I do wonder if it's more that she's a pawn than she's inherently nasty. I think the sort of twist with the Hellhound and the Hammer having to join the triare of the Crescent City is pretty cool. I'm intrigued to see where this arranged marriage goes, and the fact that the Oracle has seen that that Bryce and Cormac like get together, like, it's very clever. Like, it's very specifically worded so that you can very easily interpret it not as a marriage or like a romantic union, but maybe they end up having to work together. I can kind of see Cormac being a much more sympathetic and complex character than he first seems, but we will see where that goes. I'm not sure if I've done an update since we got the little like Tharian chapter, but I now know that my theory about Sophie and Emile being Hunt's ancestors can't be correct, because the events that you see in the prologue happen 2 weeks before chapter 1. But still, I suspect there is some connection between them, but we'll just have to see how it all shakes out. But so far, I am really enjoying it. I'm 23% of the way through, and I feel like stuff's starting to happen. So Adis has just visited Bryce's apartment and given everyone a shock, because obviously he's a Prince of the Chasm. But I think Adis is like my favourite character in this series. I think because he seems to be quite complex and not as obvious as he first seems. And it's really interesting that he seems to be continuing to reveal stuff. He's a little bit like years ago there was a Green Lantern remake movie, and I'm pretty sure there was like a fish character that was like the exposition fish. I could be completely misremembering, but I do remember an exposition fish from something, and like their whole point was to provide exposition, but also like Ada seems like a catch. I don't know. I just really like his character. What does that say about me, that one of the princes of hell is my favourite character? But right at the end of the chapter, it's revealed that Cormac is Silver. So I was right, there is a lot more to him, and it does seem that Danica and Cormac are going to have to team up in that way. So I'm glad pieces are starting to fall into place as I expect. I also think it's interesting that we now know that Cormac would want to be with Sophie, or at least you presume Cormac would want to be with Sophie. So I feel like things are starting to happen. It's getting very interesting. Up until this point, it's felt a little bit slow as it's been trying to like build up the story. But now that we're getting somewhere, I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm also like desperately waiting for Audible to update their system, because obviously it is the 15th now, but I know that they're really bad at, like, if you pre-order an audiobook, it doesn't seem to be clear what time it becomes available on its release day. I would have presumed midnight, but I know from experience it's never midnight. I'm hoping that it updates in the next few hours so I can go for a bit of a morning walk. But I guess we'll see. It's officially daylight now, which feels bonkers. Like, I've been reading for about 8 hours now. I feel like I've not been reading as intensely as I did with Silver Flames, but still fairly intensely. But now the audiobook's available, I feel like I can relax a bit and don't have to focus so much, because I think it can be a bit mentally exhausting to read that intensely. But I do have a coffee because despite having a nap yesterday evening, I'm starting to feel a little bit weary, but again, I don't know if it's just mental exhaustion. I don't have much in the way of thoughts. It always amuses me when I listen to an audiobook and hearing the accents that the characters have got. So Cormac's got an Irish accent for some reason, and Baxian's accent, I can't quite place it. Like, clearly the narrator is American, so the accents aren't accurate, but he seems to have a kind of British accent. When you think about London accents, you think of there's kind of like the received pronunciation, posh, my daddy went to Eton accent, and then there's the less posh accent. And it feels like that, like it's not quite a roadman. Like it's not a roadman accent. But could you imagine if he was? That'd be interesting. I'm about 34% of the way through, and I'm very intrigued by the fact that you can't tell the motivations of the characters. Like, Celestina seems like she could actually be a good character, although obviously I don't know. I guess time will tell whether she's lying or not. Cormac obviously is a lot more complex than he first seemed. I'm still really enjoying Adis, even though I've only seen him once in this book. I could read a whole book on Adis. I'm also quite like that we saw the Star Eater. That was an interesting addition to the story. But I think now I'm going to get back to it and see. I feel like not much is going on. But as I said earlier, I remember House of Earth and Blood, it was an engaging enough story, but not much happened for the first 3 quarters, and then everything happened. So I guess I'm kind of expecting that as well, so could be another 40% before stuff really kicks off. But now that I have got the audiobook, I've got a bit more flexibility, and you never know, maybe I will pop out for a walk later. I could be wrong, but I'm starting to think that Cormac's meant to be Scottish, not Irish. I think that says it all about his accent, to be honest, that I can't tell which one it's meant to be, considering I live in Scotland. I don't know. Celtic of some description, I guess. But it's funny actually, like right after I stopped recording last time, I got to the bit where like Rune gets kidnapped and then Bryce finds out just what the Star Sword can do in her hands. It's all the stuff being revealed. So I'm at around the 40% mark, and Hunt is pleasuring Bryce in the gym. And I have some thoughts about that scene, but also kind of more in general. So it seems like Matt has gone back to vagaries in terms of this scene. So earlier when Rune was performing the same thing, we were using proper words, and now it's mound and sex and wetness. It seems like a step backwards. I don't know if it's because this is a longer scene or what, but it just feels less. It feels like all the progress we saw in chapter 3 just is gone out the window. The other thing I've noticed is that, at least in the case of Bryce, she continues to be described in Maas's classic racially ambiguous terms. So Bryce is described as being tan, have golden skin, which is really frustrating because it's just classic Maas. Once again, it seems like I spoke too soon, as we are now using words like clit, which is good. I appreciate that. Bryce and Hunt have decided they're mates, and I can't help rolling my eyes. Like, at least in this world, like, mates seems to be an intense one, but it isn't as kind of something clicks into place. It just seems to be a commitment type thing. So I guess that's better, but also really every book they have to be mates. But then part of me wonders if it's a little early. Like, from what I understand, this is a trilogy, and we're like 41% into book 2, and I just wonder if something's gonna happen. Like, I think Hunt's meant to be endgame, but then I don't know. But then part of me is like, is Hunt gonna die? That could be interesting. But also, apart from Adis, but like, I'm a massive fan of Adis, I don't feel like any of the love interest has been queued up. I'm just a bit tired of the idea of mates, I guess. I don't know. What's your thoughts on mates? So it's 11 o'clock now, and I've reached the halfway point. And I know I keep saying this, but I'm just kind of waiting for something to happen. Like, we are getting the odd reveal, but I just feel like I'm not getting enough from this book, and I'm really tired of Ethan's like whining, yearning for Bryce. Like, it seems like it's not gonna go anywhere, so what's even the point? I'm also super intrigued by who Agent Daylight is. I can't remember if that's the correct name. Like, I have a feeling it's someone we know, but who it is, it's hard to tell. Like, initially I thought it was Celestina, and then I thought maybe Hypaxia, and there's been a couple of hints, like a family, something to do with temples or priests, and Rune possibly recognises her voice, but that doesn't really narrow it down. I don't know. I don't know if I just need to take a break from this book for a bit, but at the same time, I want to continue pushing on so I get to something that's actually going to hook me in. Because I feel like with House of Earth and Blood, like it was different on the reread because I knew that a lot of stuff was coming. But the first time I read it, I think I was kind of thinking, okay, but... And then I got to that kind of last bit where everything happened and I loved it. And I can't remember what rating I gave it then, but on reread I gave it a 4.5. So like there's clearly potential. But just feeling a bit meh right now. I don't know.
When the wind comes in, pull our time on my knees, I went.
I'm starting to feel really quite tired now, which I think is odd. I don't know. Like, it's only 1:30. Yeah, it's 20 to 2 now. So it's not like I've been up for ages, but then I did only have like maybe 4 hours yesterday evening. I don't know. But I'm on 507 of 806 now, and Bryce and Hun are finally having sex. It's felt like such a long journey for them to get there, and I don't know what to feel about it. Also, they're not just like calling each other mates, they are actually mates, which means we're 3 for 3. And I don't know if it's really like messed up, but like I don't want Hunt to survive this book. Is that horrible? Like, I don't dislike Hunt. It just feels really convenient and easy. I don't know. Also, she's still using proper words. She's still calling it cock and stuff, but she just couldn't help herself and she's described his cock as velvety. And I'm like, really? You managed to not use velvet wrapped steel, so instead you say velvety cock? What? I definitely think we're getting to a point where all the threads are starting to come together, but it's still feeling quite slow. I think part of it is the fact that it felt like Bryce and Hunt should have gotten together earlier in the book. Like, to be over 500 pages into the book and they're only just getting there feels a little excessive, especially given what they were like in the first book. But I've still also got quite a chunk to go, so I'm interested to see what these next 300 pages will contain.
When you cross my line, and so the seasons right, so I fall behind. When the wind comes in, I cross your mind.
We're finally getting answers, and they're worth the wait. So it turns out Baxian was Danica's mate, and then he has the key to what the number that Sophie had carved on herself before she died. Oh, so intrigued. But also, like, it's bringing up all the feelings of about Danica. 16% left, and I don't know what to think. I also know that I've heard multiple times that the last page, the last sentence, has something pretty major on, so I'm thinking this is gonna pack a punch right up until the last moment. So I'm in the last stretch. I've got maybe 15% of the book left, and I just want to jump in here with like a theory. So I've said that, as bizarre as it sounds, I kind of want Hunt to die. I think that's more that it felt too easy. Like it's great that they haven't really had like big obstacles to overcome to be together, but considering this is book 2, it feels like something's about to hit the fan. So I suspect, as much as like killing characters off isn't really Maas's style, like I know that characters do die in her books, but it's always felt like less central characters. But I mean that's very much like an opinion. But I think someone fairly major is gonna die. I don't think it's gonna be Bryce, but that would make for a really interesting next book. So I think there's an outside chance it's gonna be Bryce or Hunt. But I also think we could see Rune dying. I don't think it's going to be Ethan because he's already been brought back. I think Hypaxia, I don't know. I feel like she's not major enough for it to be a punch. But who else could we have? Like, I also don't think it's going to be Tharian. I don't know. Like, I think we're heading towards a major character death. But I've got nothing to build that on. But also, they've made a point of explaining that necromancy doesn't actually bring someone back. So that could be something to overcome in the next book, is that you have a big character death in this book, and then somehow they've got to overcome the fact that necromancy doesn't bring people back. So I don't know. But also, like, at the back of my head, I've constantly got Rune's, like, what Rune heard from the Oracle about the bloodline ending with him. But then again, maybe all that means is that Peleus's bloodline ends with him. That could be it. Maybe. I guess we'll see. And right now I'm thinking that the Hind is Agent Daybright. I think there's a fairly high chance it's the Hind. But hopefully that'll be revealed before the end of the book. Sorry, it's gone dark, but it's a fucking Crescent! Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh, no wonder everyone's freaking out! Oh my gosh, Becca's gonna be so mad! I watched a video yesterday and she was saying how she didn't want it to be a crossover. And it's a fucking crossover. Oh my gosh. Oh. Okay, so I don't know if it's the last sentence of the last chapter that's got people freaking out, or if the epilogue is also going to get people freaking out. But all I've got left is the epilogue, and I am dying here. So after the way that the final chapter ended, the epilogue was kind of a bit of a letdown. So I've got like thoughts on this book. I don't like the whole the story like some weird colonizer eating their power or something. It strayed a little bit too much into sci-fi, and like I don't mind sci-fi, but I want this to be fantasy. And I went in thinking it was fantasy, so that frustrated me. And also it didn't feel very unique. Like Sarah J Maas doesn't have the most unique books, but it was just a bit weird. I don't know. I'm gonna sit with it for a bit and then come back and probably give some fuller thoughts. So I've kind of sat with it for a bit, and I think overall this book is a 3.5. Obviously, I think the ending where we've got a crossover with Resand. I said it right. I never say it right. Is pretty cool. I'm a bit like, it feels a little bit cobbled together because I'm sure the place that the Fae come from is described as being like wreathed in darkness or something. But then again, it doesn't necessarily have, no, because it's the same language. I was going to say it doesn't necessarily have to be the correct one, but like she literally speaks in the ancient Fae language, which means that they have to be from the same place because it's a common language, which is a bit odd. I suppose that also accounts for it looking different. But yeah, that ending bit, like the epilogue, I'm like, whatever. And I'm sure it's important, but it didn't even hit the same as the epilogue for House of Earth and Blood. But overall, that's my feelings on the book as a whole. Like, it just didn't hit the same. And it's really annoying because, like, I was so excited for this book because House of Earth and Blood hit so much. And this was just like, meh. There were some really good points. I liked that it seemed more diverse. The queerness was a lot more explicit. You had a variety of queer characters, some bad, some good. I did not enjoy that it went a bit science fiction-y. It didn't do it for me. I'm a little bit frustrated that we still don't get an idea about Hunt's parenthood, the reveal about Danica's, sire and mate just didn't do it for me. Having the pairing being a mated pair as well, I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if they weren't mates for a change? But I don't know, like, it wasn't inherently bad, and I did enjoy parts of it a lot, and I'm really interested to see what happens next. And I think it'll be particularly interesting to see if we get a crossover book, or if we get more of this story in ACOTAR, or if we actually have to wait for another Crescent City book. I think that's what's got me most intrigued. But I don't know, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, because how do you beat Bryce making the drop and Danica anchoring her despite being dead, and Danica like giving up her immortality? Well, not her immortality, like Danica giving up the last bit of herself to anchor Bryce was amazing. I'm also like low-key annoyed that the only time Adis appeared in this book, it wasn't actually Adis. Like, that's no fair. I like Adis so much and it wasn't even him. So yeah, I think I'm overall like interested to see what happens next, but wasn't overly thrilled. Just popping this clip right in at the end. I finally got my hands on my physical copy, and I've read the Waterstones exclusive chapter. It's the Hunt one. I actually think the little bit of snippet you get between Bryce and Hunt was less exciting. I was more invested in seeing Bryce and Flynn's relationship, and just Flynn talking about how Rune and himself connected and where Deck fits into it all. And that's all for me today. Feel free to chat down in the comments. I want to know everything you thought about this book, theories for the next book, and until next time, bye.
There's a place